A quick disclaimer that what you're about to see is from the official review build. The developers have been kind enough to send me a key to the full version, but otherwise this video is not sponsored. So Zero Parades is an espionage RPG made by some of the people who worked on Disco Elysium. You play as Hershel, a spy who goes by the codename Cascade. By the way, this video will be as spoiler-free as possible. Now 5 years ago she led an operation that went sideways and got most of her team killed. Again, this is not a spoiler, it happens right at the beginning. Since then she has been stuck in what they call the freezer. This is basically spy purgatory, where they put agents they don't trust anymore, but can't quiet fire. Now she has actually been called back to Portofino, an independent city caught between competing superpowers, for just one more assignment. When you arrive, your partner who got there ahead of you is incapacitated under mysterious circumstances. To keep it vague, so you're walking into a situation knowing basically nothing, and you have to piece together what's happening, while dealing with 3 major factions. There's your own side, a communist superbloc called the Operant. Then there's Lu, this techno-fascist empire that is aggressively trying to reclaim its former colonies. And there's the MT, basically a stand-in for the IMF or World Bank. So essentially wealthy bankers who control things through that. I won't get into the actual mystery or plot beyond that setup. Visually the game looks great. It keeps that same isometric perspective and painterly art style, but Portofino has its own character. You've got canal districts with boats stuck between buildings, vegetation creeping over old architecture, market stalls under string lights. It looks impressive, and the atmosphere is top notch. And people who regularly watch me know I'm a sucker for good atmosphere. The lighting shifts as day turns to night, and there is a pretty nice contrast between these rundown industrial eras, and bits of color from bootleg goods, and neon signs. The character models and user interface have a pretty clean and detailed look. Your inventory screen shows your spy laid out like a technical schematic, and the skill icons are these little pin designs. During tense moments, the tactical view overlays these abstract illustrations on the environment that make the whole thing feel more stylized. It's honestly a pretty striking game to look at. Now the actual gameplay of course borrows a lot from Disco Elysium, but changes some key things, and I think the changes are interesting, even if they don't always land better. Let me explain. Instead of health and morale, you have 3 hazard meters: fatigue, anxiety and delirium. If any of them max out, then you permanently lose skill points. You manage them by smoking, drinking coffee, having a beer, the usual spy coping mechanisms. What I do like about this is you're constantly making these small decisions about whether to push yourself or take care of yourself. Do you chug that coffee to lower fatigue, even though it will spike your anxiety? Do you smoke to bring down delirium, but raise your fatigue? So this definitely feels more active than Disco Elysium's system, in my opinion at least. Like you're actually managing the toll that spy work takes on you. The downside is that when you max out a meter, then you just lose a skill point. You don't die or anything dramatic. It is purely negative reinforcement. You messed up and now you're a tiny bit weaker. In Disco, maxing out your meters could lead to these absurd, memorable deaths. Here it just feels like a mistake you have to compensate for. This is less punishing for sure, but also less interesting. The game does have specific moments where you can indeed die from bad choices, and those are funny, but they are scripted story beats. The skills themselves are similar but reflavored for espionage, like there's grey matter for your detective brain, personalism for blending in and seeming normal, nerve for keeping cool under pressure. They are represented as little pin designs of animals, and yes, they still talk to you in your head, though Hershel is way less of a mess than Harry. She seems more understated and more controlled, which makes sense for a spy. The game seems to understand that Hershel can't be a loud disaster the way Harry was. She's got her own problems, but they are quieter, more subtle, and more internalized. So I appreciate that it doesn't just gender swap Harry. There is one thing I really like, and that's the conditioning system. This is sort of like Disco's thought cabinet, and it changes the gameplay rules. You can unlock these psychological states that do more than just tweak stats. There's one where you can try functional invisibility, so you attempt to walk right past someone who's looking for you by convincing yourself you're not worth noticing. Another one limits how often you can save. Another one gets you roped into a telemarketing scam. The confrontations work differently too. There is something called tactical view, where the time pauses and you can plan out your next move. You can see the odds of success and assess risks. It's not turn-based strategy, more like the game acknowledging that tense moments happen in slow motion when you are trained for this stuff. And then there's the exertion system, where you can push yourself to improve your odds on important rolls, but this one costs you. This setting is where this game really finds its own identity. The city is caught in this cultural and economic tug of war, and the game explores this excellently through little details that really feel lived in. You've got a bootleg bazaar full of knockoff Lucian goods, because there's officially a cultural blockade, but of course that doesn't actually work. This city used to make textiles, and now it just imports cheap crap from overseas. There's a teenager running smuggling operation, who swears constantly in this very specific teenage way. The three-way tension between the opera, Lou and MT isn't just a backdrop. It really does feel baked into how people live here, and what they genuinely want and what they're afraid of. It reminds one of course of how Disco was genuinely interested in political ideologies. And of course, failure is built into how the game works. You are going to fail skill checks constantly. That is expected. The game doesn't treat it as some kind of reloading material. You just have to deal with the consequences and figure out a new approach. Sometimes failing also opens up different options that are just as interesting. The voice acting is very solid, and there is also genuinely funny writing scattered throughout. It is worth mentioning that this comes from a messy situation. Based on my knowledge, the original Disco Elysium creators got pushed out of the studio in what seems like a pretty ugly business dispute, so calling it from the creators of Disco Elysium is technically true, but complicated. For what it's worth, the game does stand out on its own. It is not trying to beat Disco Elysium 2. At around $40 US, this game feels about right for what you're getting. If you liked Disco and want something in that style, but focused on espionage and geopolitical intrigue instead of police work and local politics, then it is most certainly checking out. It is likely not going to hit the same heights as Disco for you. This was basically lightning in a bottle, but it is a good game in its own right. And this sentence concludes today's video. If your time was respected, a like or comment is very much appreciated.